thanks for coming along. I always get a bit of a buzz when I talk at the gardens because so many people come along. I know it's not to see me, but to see what they can find out about our little friends, the little Aussie heroes, the Australian stingless native bee. Now in the past I've had to deliver a similar sort of talk. Sometimes we've split hives, sometimes we've taken a bit of honey out, but today it's going to be more of a hands-on demonstration. As luck would have it, not so lucky for the bees I suppose, but a white cypress tree, one of the calitris, like the one you see over here, which is so common along our esplanade, one of them came down in a storm, and it must have been a pretty weak old tree because it really shattered and left the core of the bee's nest quite exposed on the ground. The garden staff were quite concerned about its chances of survival, so they asked me if I could do something with it. I took it home, and it's been at my place at Dundarren for about the last 2 months. I brought it in Thursday night, and I lashed it up underneath that cage. That cage will be the permanent home to the bees once we transfer them into the box. Now the reason why I put them there Thursday night was so that the flight bees would become orientated to the gardens and know that that's the spot where they're going to be living. So it shouldn't be very hard for them to find the entrance to the hive once we re-establish them and relocate them up there. Now the hive that I use is a standard oath hive, a hive the design of which can be credited to Tim Hurd. And for those of you who don't know about this particular book, recently written by Tim Hurd on the subject of keeping Australian native bees, I recommend it to you. It's full of information and it's a quality production. Now Tim came up with the dimensions of this particular hive, and I've made some variations to suit my purposes. I love working with timber, so I endeavour to make the hives as attractive as I can, as well as functional. Now the hive's built in 3 parts. The bottom part is, or the bottom 2 parts, which I hold together with these stainless steel spring clips, that's where all the breeding of the bees goes on. And this plate that fits in the top is actually a brood excluder, and it stops the brood from moving up into the uppermost part of the hive, which has a cavity. The bees soon learned that that's the best spot for them to store honey. So beekeepers who have a mind to steal the honey, rob the bees, can remove that lid by puncturing all their little honey pots, can then tip the lid up over a container and collect the honey if they so desire. I personally leave the honey for the bees. Now the idea this morning will be to split that log open in a manner that does the least amount of damage to the bees, the brood and their honey. And we'll relocate the brood and some of their food supplies into the box. Now in the bottom of this box I have a wire mesh base, and below that wire mesh base I have drilled 2 small holes. The idea of that is that if there is any spilt honey transferred into that box, the honey can drain out of those holes, and rather than have bees crawling around in the base and getting bogged down in honey, they can crawl around on that wire. When I make my hives, I usually make a recess in the bottom half of the brood chamber and put a piece of perspex in it with a hole like so. The reason for that is that the holes allow for the brood to grow through the big hole up into the top half of the hive, of the breeding chamber. These other holes allow for the free movement of bees. But when the time comes that I want to split my hive to propagate another colony of bees, that splitting plate makes it so much easier for me to divide the brood nest into two, the beginnings of two colonies. And the way I create those two colonies is I put an empty top half on top of that bottom half of the brood, and this top half of the brood I put on top of an empty bottom half. So I have the nucleus of two colonies. But we're not here to split and make new colonies today. We're here to transfer the contents of that log. Now, a lot of people call this rescuing. I don't know how true that is. These bees, I think, have been laying in that shattered log for quite some time. And if I can get a volunteer to give me a hand, I'm feeling strong. You can help just take the weight up there while I undo this rope. I think this log had been in this shattered state laying for quite some time before the council staff even found it. They're fairly good at protecting their nest, their nest with a hard layer of material collected from the wild, resins that are hardened, perhaps reinforced with vegetable matter. They make a substance called bitumen, a bit like bitumen I suppose, and that's their outer armour plating of their nest. It's quite common for these bees to be living in big hollow trees together with various nests of ants, etc. They seem to be able to do it quite harmoniously because that hard bitumen layer protects the bees. Okay. It's a fairly big nest. I have no idea how old it is. I suspect it's been in this tree for a long, long time. The base of the nest is down here, all the way through to there. Now, that outer casing is going to be very hard to break through. And I think the best way for me to do that, to break through it, is to use a chainsaw. By the way, that hole there is the entrance hole that the bees used when it was located in the tree. But when it broke, when the tree came down and the whole tree was shattered, it exposed a number of other entrance holes. They have a few other places where they're coming and going at the moment. I've had an ongoing lifetime hate affair with chainsaws. They never start for me. And this one is a beauty. Just pull, 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 and away it goes. Would you like to come and just hold this firmly for me? Okay. When I found this log, it was laying this way. Originally, it would have been upright, but having been laying down for some time, the inside of the nest, the comb, will be reorientated to this level, so it will be easier for me to dig the brood comb out if I cut it along these lines. Okay, so you can just hold it like so. before I start, there's something else I should explain. For those of you who've seen this sort of operation on YouTube before, you'll see that the bees tend to ignore the operator who's doing the split. And those lucky people invariably are splitting open a nest of Tetragonula carbonaria. Now, we don't have Tetragonula carbonaria up here. We have a variety Tetragonula Hocking's eye, who are quite capable of letting you know just how cheesed off they are when you attack them with a chainsaw. Now, because I'm being filmed today, I'm going to see if I can not put the veil on for a while. But these blokes are very able to work out who's the person using the chainsaw, and they'll come at me. Don't you worry about that. Right, okay, here we go. I've got a veil there if I have to use it, and I think I'll have to use it. Tip it over the other way.
Nobody can see through you.
We're going to start getting lumpy now.
They are stingless bees, but they can mouth you. They particularly like getting into spots where there is tender skin. Up the legs of your pants. Try and get rid of some of this sawdust. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Linda. Now, I had a brush here somewhere. You see a brush down there?
In the bucket. Oh, no, they're friendly.
Okay. Thanks, Linda.
Love bites everywhere.
Here they go.
Now, the heroics are over, and on comes the bale. And that bale only keeps out a small proportion.
Cut down between the bacon layer and the inside of the trunk of the tree there, Doug.
I've tried to split minimum disruption to the bees, this outer layer. But I suspect it's around here. I'd dearly love to know how many years they've been here. I feel it's a long, long time.
You've got to cut this end a bit more, Doug. There you go. There you go.
Now, if the camera would come in a bit closer, we can look here. We can see layers of brood. And I'm pretty certain that it is not a nest of Hocking's eye.
Looks like
Because the layers, I think the layers are a bit disturbed because the nest is being reorientated for its new position on the ground rather than being upright. But there's a gap between the two parts of the nest. And that lower part is the advancing front. The queen, she lays about 300 eggs a day, and the nest is a constant rotation. As they lay up to the top of the nest, they will eventually come around and rebuild cells and lay at the bottom of the nest. And so here we have evidence of the advancing front coming up to meet the older bees that are hatching first.
So if you were wanting to increase the number of hives that you've got there, would you put that into 2 hive boxes?
The question
If there was evidence of queen cells there.
would I be tempted to put that into 2 hive boxes? The answer to that question is I have done it in the past. not always with best success. I always like to think that transfer the whole nest where I can. But in actual fact, this exercise that I'm doing now is something I rarely ever do anymore. All my numbers are made up from splitting hives.
Why can't you just leave them in there? Because they fall in the tree? Why do they need to go in a man-made?
Well, they don't need to go in a man-made hive, but the chances are that eventually this nest will give out. It's rotten anyway.
Okay, because it's in the tree.
If it had remained in with the protection of the outer casing of the tree, it would have lasted indefinitely.
Just so you know, in the garden just behind Doug here, that's where we tried to leave it in the logs probably about 6 months ago. It got cut down accidentally again. I mean, Arbor don't know that it's in there half the time.
It was after the big storms went through, so it wasn't, it had to go, had to be cut down, it wasn't cut down.
And they probably stayed in there for about 3 weeks. And then I came over one day and they were all gone. They're relocated or got pushed out by a bug.
Now, I'm sorry this is taking a while, but I'm trying to get this out with minimum damage to the nest, to the brood.
I don't know. Still bothering me.
The native bees swarm like normal bees,
No.
and yet about this time each year I've got one in the yard that it's probably just the heat drives them out of the hive, but there seems to be mass of them swarming, say, in the morning.
Well, I'll talk in detail about that a little later. That's a whole topic in itself. What is amazing to me is that we have here what I believe to be, and I know it is, a nest of Tetragonula carbonaria. They are very rare around here. Now, about 8 years ago, the gardens acquired from Tim Hurd 2 hives of Tim's bees, which are carbonaria. And they were placed here in the gardens, and over the years, in a demonstration to crowds like we have here today, I have split those bees, and now I can tell you that I think virtually all of those carbonaria hives are now Hocking's eye hives. Hocking's eye can be fairly aggressive. Now I'm putting a bit of honey at the back of this nest and a bit of pollen at the front. I'm not going to put a lot in there, and I won't be putting my splitting board on top of it.
So there's no correct method of putting that cone in there to protect your brood?
I've got it orientated the right way up. Trying to shake a few bees out here. I'm not going to take too much more of this, but I'm going to get some of this structure that they build with, and I'm going to embed it around the entrance hole to the hive so that there will be something there.
So how do you know you've got the queen?
The queen will be down in the middle of those layers of brood. You don't very often see the queen. It's usually hidden away down in amongst that brood. Now, just lift it off. The bees, quite a few bees, are clustered around the cage there. Their homing instinct tells them that that's where their entrance to their hive is. Now I'm going to place this hive after I do the clips up. Now, I think we will just going to put a little bit of that structure up there to hopefully encourage them. And
Do you consider that a big hive?
yeah, that's a big nest. And I think we might just lash this up there for a while as well.
Doug, would you ever do a split on that?
On that,
Yeah.
create two nests from
Yeah.
one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I could have done that. Okay, what do I do with that piece of rope? Remember what we did with the rope? After a while the message will get out that the queen is inside. There's quite a bit of honey here. We might just try and salvage a bit of that honey and you can have a taste perhaps. But from the point of view of this whole exercise, the brood is inside, the queen will be in there. A lot of bees will be reluctant to leave this because they think it's their home, but they will in time move, all of them will go in there. Now the bees that were congregating on the outside, they're the field bees, the ones that in the latter part of their life are out foraging. A lot of these bees that are inside the hive that are still clustered here have never been outside the hive. That's their home. So they will find it difficult to know that they're to fly into that box. So what I'm going to do, after I've robbed a bit of the honey, we will... Now that's all pollen. I've already transferred a bit of pollen. Dig out some honey now. It's an awful mess. It doesn't look very appetising. For those of you who want to poke your little fingers in there, you can. If you were an Aboriginal a couple of hundred years ago, before you had your chance to get, before we had Coca-Cola and sugar fixes that way, you would have thought this was absolutely beautiful.
And it is.
And you'd have eaten the lava, the pollen, everything. Okay, we'll set that aside.
Is that all the honey there would be in that hive?
No, there's more honey spread around in there, but it's not easy to get at, so I'm not going to bother with it. If I hadn't had an audience and I was just on my own, I would have done it much quicker than that without explaining it.
You would have swore a bit there.
They good?
You would have swore a bit there.
No, I never swore at these fellas. These little guys have been my mates since 1992. I'm a bit different than most Queenslanders. Most Queenslanders, young blokes who grew up in the bush, get to know about bush bees, as they're usually called, and learn to rob them and do all those things from very young. I didn't become a Queenslander until the 80s. I grew up in South Australia, where there are no stingless native bees like this. They're only found in the tropical, subtropical parts of this country. There are 11 distinct groups that live together with the queen, whole heap of workers, and drones for breeding purposes only. I was fortunate that the farmer out at Craig Nish came to me one day. He said, would you like a log of native bees? The tree had fallen on his shed. And he knew that I'd been a commercial honeybee keeper for many years. Thought I'd know all about native bees, and it was a major revelation to me. But we've become well acquainted, and now in my retirement for the last 10 years, it's just about my full-time occupation.
Thank you.